Hello, everyone. Maybe we are still waiting for some participants who might join later. Anyhow, I will start and continue. We will start and continue this presentation in English, of course, because we have our precious mentors of the masterclass with us today. And I welcome you all in this exciting journey which we are starting right now. And of course, I'm really thrilled to see you all being interested in this masterclass that is being organized at the occasion of Susan Meiselas exhibition in Jakobitz Gallery, which we are opening on 20th of June. And as Susan would not be Susan if she would not always share, think broader concepts and bring new people in. That's why when I asked her if it's possible for Susan to do a masterclass for Slovenian and photographers here in our region, then she proposed also two collaborators, mentors in this masterclass, which are Lydia Matthews and Luciana Pinchiero. So we have our three mentors with us today with the purpose to meet them, to especially learn about why they are so engaged in community-oriented photographic projects. And of course, what I'm hoping the most, what we can learn from their work, from their guidance. And this is why, yes, I will only say a little bit more about them. I'm sure I don't have to especially present Susan Meiselas as a Magnum photographer, as the president of Magnum Foundation, and the photographer who is, for me, one of absolutely most socially engaged and conscious photographers of our time. And her work is the work which really shows that the camera for her is not something what is an obstacle between her and people she's photographing, but it is a tool how to get closer to their reality and really understand them. Susan, of course, we will be hosting her exhibition through the whole summer, which is a great opportunity for us, for Jakobitz Gallery. However, as I already mentioned, we also have Lydia Matthews with us. Lydia is Brooklyn and Athens based, if I understand right. That is because of her profession as a lecturer, I understand as well. She is a lecturer, she's a curator and a writer, the author, and I could go on and on probably, but I'm sure you will meet Lydia more in detail, or you can also, of course, always see her website. And there are really several projects she works in with designers, artists, photographers, all kinds of creative people, I would say, and especially also communities, which is also why we are happy to have Lydia with us. And then we also have Luciana Pinchiero, which is, well, as you can see also in this Zoom call, of course, the right hand of Susan. She is Susan's assistant, but also a very exciting work she produces as a photographer. She is Argentinian born, but moved to USA for her studies. And she has been exhibiting and working as a photographer for, well, not so long, we would say, but I think it's not so little time as well, based on, well, that she's still younger, but that doesn't mean that she's not very productive, I think. So those are our three ladies. Hello, welcome in Slovenian little community which is gathering here around our gallery, and we are thrilled to have you with us. Not to lose time, because Lydia, Susan, and Lou have presented some kind of presentations and interest for you to understand their work better. I will let them the word now and invite them to to speak about their work and what can inspire you at first place. Please.
Thanks, Maria and Julia, who I got to meet a few months ago. And I think we all appreciate your openness to this experiment. So all of you who are listening in, Luli, who is the studio manager in New York for me and with me, is actually a visual artist herself, not only based in photography, working with collage and other mediums, including sculpture. And Lydia and I did a project very recently together. We're old friends, but the project we did, which she's going to present, was really why I thought we would make a wonderful team. Luli has also been working with me on the Kurdish workshops. So I'm going to share screen and just dive into why you will understand pretty soon as to why I thought they would be great partners for us. If I can just get going here. Hopefully. So as I said, Lydia has worked in many places, and you'll hear from her about that after I speak. I just wanted you to see us at work, because I think we all in different ways work with, and I think we also work for communities. And really that to me is kind of what this particular workshop, master workshop, is really about. So we're each going to make relatively short visual presentations. You can ask us questions at the end. I'm going to try and move quickly through 4 projects, and the 4 projects really are only to give you a feeling of how, for me at least, ideas evolve. I don't start with an idea and impose it. It really evolves from and with working with community. So I'm going to move from different parts of the world. There are, of course, many things that happen in between, but so you see a little bit relational thinking from my first project ever, actually, as a photographer in a town called Lando, South Carolina, to Kurdistan, which is several decades later, to a shelter, women's shelter for domestic violence in the UK, and a community outside of Lisbon, which is really what led Lydia and I to working together in the last couple of years. So I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to show you in funny pictures, including my very first me in a classroom with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in the South Bronx of New York. I was teaching photography using pinhole cameras made out of shoeboxes, small plastic cameras. We built a darkroom in the classroom. And the whole idea of that class was very basic learning to read and write, stimulating kids who were really not wanting to be in school for the most part, and gathering with teachers through the Polaroid Foundation gave us film and cameras at that time. And this is just a page from a book I did called Learn to See, which was bringing teachers' projects together to teach the basics of reading and writing. So the community was really the classroom, and my goal was getting kids out of the classroom into the world around them. But the project you see on the left really was one of the most successful, called alphabetography. And it was this idea of looking for the alphabet in the world around them. And that was mainly because this was about visual literacy. So the project that really led me then south to South Carolina as an artist in residence led me back into thinking about, as a photographer teaching in the local school, in the afternoons I would go out and of course I was rarely invited into people's homes. So I called this the Porch Series. But I'm really going to emphasize how my own work making those photographs led me to think as a Northerner seen in the South, which I don't know what the parallel would be in Slovenia, but certainly the legacy of slavery, the indentured labor. These were issues that I was not yet addressing. And in fact, what I ended up doing was working with teenagers, training them to use Polaroid cameras, which were positive, negative film at that time, and go out into the community, much as I had been teaching kids in the South Bronx. And as they went out, they also started to discover photographs in their community. And what in fact became the summer project was photographing as they did and gathering photographs from their families. And that became the project that really was the center point in the local community hall. And I still love this photograph with everyone coming and seeing the family photographs of others. What you see on the back walls is what was almost a visual genealogy. This was a town where the mill had been closed and closing. Many of the members of the families were starting to leave. So we did a visual genealogy where you see the grandparents and then the next generation, and then the generation that stayed in Landau was then on the third line down, and you progressively saw how few people were left from each of those families. And of course, I love that this is the billiards table, and we just modified. And I want to emphasize that because you all are going to be thinking about how you work with communities, what you might install, what opportunities there are to bring the work back to the community that the work came from. So now I'm going to leap so you understand in my zigzag life over 5 decades. The next place this kind of archival work really appears is in Kurdistan in the 90s. So the early work was in the 70s, 20 years later, completely different setting. I'm not going to go through my evolution as a photographer on this call, but I begin to work more actively as a photographer, and including working with the media. And one of the photographs, what I'm showing you here, is a cover photograph of an exhumation in northern Iraq of Kurds. And the reason it became important was really, it was because I was doing this work focused on documenting and the visual evidence, essentially. I began to see people holding photographs. So the linkage in my mind moved from making photographs, and the concept evolved, wondering whether or not I could actually kind of bring together a visual history of the Kurds. So it was conceived in the field, and I'm very clear I would never have imagined it any other way. So I think when you begin a project like this, of course, you have no idea what you're going to find. My work at that time, rather than beginning in the community, other than seeing photographs, it became looking in Western archives for where photographs of the Kurds might appear. So be it in London at the Public Records Office, since the British had a strong presence in Mesopotamia, back into the US. And then little by little, the Kurds would tell me about people who had come to Kurdistan. I am sure there's a huge history in Slovenia of foreigners over the last century and a half who came to Slovenia, did work, and took that work away. I became fascinated by whether or not you could bring that work back to the community. So it was it was a project of repatriation to engage the community. I think the important thing here is just to see there are different ways to engage. So this time the positive negative film from Polaroid is being used to reproduce their photographs, not to make photographs. And I was looking for really visualizing the kinds of contributions. So this is being done in people's backyards, going house to house, to build this collective history and gathering stories along the way. And I think that's another important idea that evolved through this project, which was the kinds of primary materials that might contextualize photographs that are historical. So what you're seeing here is the scrapbook that I used to carry around. In the end, there were 5 scrapbooks. You never know quite what you're going to find. You build a network of scholars, each of whom can make contributions, including what did they take away when they left the region to migrate to Europe. So the project ends up being a book. You can see these pages turning. I'm very interested in that process of over 100 years, the ways in which photographs are artifacts of a process themselves. So, you know, the broken glass plates or the scratches or the ripped edges or the labels that are on the backs of photographs. All of this is brought together in one volume. And of course, there are 20 million Kurds who are living in distinct minority communities with no homeland, no national archives. So this becomes a very important object. And then we bring the object into space. So this is through the 90s. It's about 6 years of research, and then a show that where the artifacts, in fact, are traveling. And I think that was an exciting thing, bringing it back to where the diaspora communities were throughout Europe. And Luli and I were just in Antwerp, where the show is now. One part of Mediations you will see includes photographs from Kurdistan. And one of the things we worked on together, was a wall that we now call the story map. And this is a young woman who worked with Luli to make a very small little book that was put on the wall a week later. And in a way, this masterclass comes out of the reality that we couldn't do a Kurdish workshop in Slovenia, and therefore we wanted to imagine a different process. So I'm going to move very quickly just to the others so you get a feeling for other kinds of ways work can be generated. I was invited to do a project in the UK. It was completely open commission, which is quite rare, in fact. And I began reading these headlines about domestic violence in that region. So it led me to search, and there were something like 300 refuge services, meaning for domestic violence specifically, shelters and other kinds of services. And I found one place where they were very open to welcoming me to do a workshop. And the workshop in this case had a different focus. I mean, these are women who may or may not want to participate and share their stories. So it began actually making soup together, chopping up the vegetables together, sitting around a round table. I worked with local artists. One of them had the proposal that they each woman could write about how they felt, kind of identifying with food. And this is just one of my favorites, which was, she's writing, "I am a piece of toast, soft and buttery, but burnt around the edges." And so this kind of a contribution was really just opening up, and other kinds of workshops we did with collage, for example, a home sweet home, the home they imagined, the home that they didn't have, but they would hope for. And my pictures are secondary. They're really those spaces of what they had at that time. The process that was important was, these are two assistants who are no longer with me, but they came along. One was working on the text and making edits of the kinds of shared stories, and Alex was also working on printing out. So the next day after I made photographs, we began to work on these constructs. So the picture on the upper left is what I made. The picture on the right is what Carol's collage was. And then there are two paragraphs. And the whole process was done in the shelter, where you see the potential participation of pages that would become a book. And I think that was a really exciting process, to be located in the shelter itself, for women to see and respond to what we were creating. The important narrative of this project is also the isolation. There's always an emergency room for someone, but seeing nothing doesn't mean, when you see something, this could mean somebody staying longer. And the picture that you saw before would be someone who really wasn't hoping to stay long, in fact, not investing in their space. So the portraits are the landscapes of the rooms. You don't see any of the women. Just one other point that I want to make, which is really something that I'm sure some of you have already had this experience, which is bringing a book back, people seeing themselves in the work that they participated in making. This is Tilak, who of course is just looking for herself. I always find it fascinating how people look. She participated in seeing this book be made, but in fact, all she's interested in is, where is she, as it were. And she gets a little desperate. I'm just shooting this with my iPhone as I give her the book, but here I am. That's the moment that is really special. So moving on, I just want to end this, which is another experiment with the Photographers Gallery in London, where we took that one photograph of the emergency room and we had no label, no information. And it was a project with the education department at the Photographers Gallery in London, because, this question of what do people see, what do they think, what do they take away, all of those questions are always there, even when you have an exhibition. And that led to making a very small publication called A View of a Room. And just to give you an idea, there was everyone wrote on a piece of paper what they saw. So as you see here, it's a place for staying, not too lonely, a guest bedroom for an unimportant guest, a bed to sleep on when you have nowhere else to go, but not home, never home. So there are 100 little stories in this tiny little book. So the last thing really is the tie-in to what Lydia is also going to speak about along with her own work. This was a project I did in Cova, which is the community just on the outside of Lisbon. Again, it was an open commission, and what I found was this brochure on the left, which was the community inviting tourists to visit them. The context being that it was a stigmatized community of squatters that were hoping to have residency and official residency. And this brochure was in an organization called SOS Racism, which there was a very little diversity in Portugal at this time. So on one hand, I'm making photographs of just what I'm finding in the community. As I meet a youth group, I begin to work with teens. I would bring back, again, the Polaroid was still available, and I was making portraits and giving them portraits as I met them. And that led to a workshop in which the kids themselves began to work with small little point and shoot cameras. And when my photographs went up at the center, the Museum of Modern Art in Lisbon, I knew that community, a few of them would come, but really there was this great gulf. And so that with those teenagers, we made another proposal, which was, you see these dots, these little red dots and green dots and yellow dots. The teens would give everybody that came to visit from downtown Lisbon when they had never been to this community, which are very narrow streets, as you saw, give them a map, and they would then see both my photographs in the streets where I had made them and their photographs, as well as the photographs I had given them in front of their homes, so on the laundry lines. And again, the most special moment was, of course, what was in the center of the community, which was the teens presenting their own work, signing their own work. And again, it's the representation of the community by and for the community. And I think in my way of thinking about it was how to bring the strangers from the distance they were closer in that sense through these photographs, crossing all those cultural borders that divide them. And that really was what made this project, I think, for me, most special. But it has multi-layers. It's time-based, obviously. It all doesn't happen in a weekend. It happens progressively over several weeks and several months. But that's the moment, that David signs his photograph and owns that space. The teens own that space. So I'm going to leave it off there and pass the baton to Lydia, who never saw the Lisbon project, but heard about it. And I'll let her share her screen and how we came to work together.
Great. Thank you, Susan. I have to start by apologizing. I barely have a voice today. I have a bit of a chest cold, but I'm going to do the best I can. And forgive me if I have to stop periodically and take a little drink. I wanted to, let me just share screen here. Hang on. Okay. Oops. Me. I'm over here. So just to give you a little bit more background, and I will then go into the project that, kind of grew out of what Susan was just showing you. I, have been involved in not so much exclusively photographic projects, although sometimes I do work with photographers, but rather very interested in socially engaged work. And I do that both as an educator, a curator, an artist, kind of with wearing different kinds of hats. Let me just get this bigger. Okay, so I thought I would just start off with a few basic principles of how I work, and then I'll begin to show you that in action. I worked, by the way, in California for many years at the California College of the Arts, and we started the first master's program in socially engaged practice. So I think a lot about how to break down these things, and also how to consider what sort of skills you need as you're developing projects that are community-based. And then for the last 18 years, have been at Parsons, where I had the privilege of meeting Luli, who you'll hear from next, who came into the program. So anyway, a few basic principles of curatorial practice. Oh, it looks like, can you see that?
That's fine. It's fine, Lou.
Okay. Wait a second. That's funny. I'm seeing something I don't want to see. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Okay. So I think it's very important to realize that as an artist or a curator, you're working at both, as a collaborator and a facilitator, and that it's very important from the very beginning to think about a horizontal power structure as much as possible, so that you understand that probably, unless you start working within your own community, you may be coming as an outsider inside. It's very important, as Susan suggested, to make sure that you are invited somehow, even if you have to kind of begin to develop the relationships such that people really are excited about working with you. I think it's also very important. Let me see if I can do this. Here we go. To replace the idea of working for the community, although, as Susan suggested, there is some of that anyway, but rather to think about working with the community and on issues that really matter locally. Also to seek out and include multiple forms of knowledge and expertise for projects. And I'm always interested, as you'll see a little bit, and you can look more fully on my website, but I'm really interested in people who see themselves as professional artists or want to be professional artists, but also who are residents who really don't necessarily have a specific interest in the arts. So that professional and amateur is really important. Multiple disciplines, multiple perspectives, multiple ways of living and believing. I also like to try to find the edge between the familiar and the bizarre. I think about that as the uncanny, because if you're working with a community and you just sort of bring back what they already have seen, that often is less exciting for them and for the broader public than finding something that can ride that edge just a bit, so that it looks both, it's familiar enough to understand, but also something that takes you somewhere else. And I think it's very important to research an environment, to discover what's missing and needed and desired, and to work with locals to imaginatively fill that void. So for me, the goal is always to co-produce local knowledge. And when I think about that, I'm really interested in the kind of knowledge that's invisible or undervalued, so that really you provoke an uncharted learning experience for both, you and anybody else who are the artists involved, all the participants, and for the local communities. So as Susan said, we worked together recently in Porto, in Portugal, and that was in the context of an exhibition that was called "What Happens to the World Happens to Us." And I was invited by this man, Virgilio, who was sort of overseeing the entire photographic biennale in Porto. And he had come to a talk where I was talking about my own work, and he came up to me afterwards and said, "I think we really need to do something socially engaged. I would like you to, propose something." And I said, well, how about if I propose working with Susan Meiselas, because I know that she did this amazing project in Lisbon. And I think she might be interested in expanding it, even though it's 15 years later, to see how this plays out in Porto. I think it's very important to realize that the whole motivant of this project came out of not necessarily thinking about how to bring Susan's work per se to Porto, but rather out of my own and Susan's engagement with what was happening on the streets at the time of the invitation, specifically the uprisings around George Floyd's murders and many other people's murders, the Black Lives Matter movement, and also all of the decolonizing work that was happening in museums, or demands for it to happen in museums and in universities. So the proposal really came out of my thinking about Portugal as one of the world's leading kind of colonial powers back in the day, and wondering how these kinds of things, Black Lives Matter and consciousness around decolonizing, was playing out locally. So when we began the project, I asked Virgilio to put us in touch originally with the scholars from the University of Porto who were working on this. And there really was one person, Ligio Ferro, who came to be involved, and she was very excited about it because she's interested in that intersection between sociology and the arts. And so you have to remember that 2020 and 21 obviously were the years of COVID. So rather than being able to go and personally meet with Lydia, and we had to figure out how to do everything in Zoom. I was living in Athens, as was said earlier. I'm both a Greek and an American citizen, and I chose to spend the COVID experience primarily in my home in Athens. Susan was in New York, and Lydia was in Porto, and she immediately said, I think there are two of my former graduate students we need to bring in. One is this person at the bottom, Lydia, Bia Lacerdo, and another Black Brazilian graduate student who was a very well-known activist and a performance artist, Dori Negro. So we began to develop a team, and I really like working in that way, so that you begin to, from the very start, putting multiple perspectives, multiple knowledge bases together to develop what this project would become. Leah asked Bia where the African associations were in the city. So she found what you could find on the internet. And then we took it to an amazing woman, respectfully known as Dona Claudia, who Dori Negro immediately said we had to involve. So you begin to see we also very consciously not only tried to bring different, so an intergenerational perspective. And what was great was that Donna Claudia, the very first time we met her, was looking at the internet maps and correcting them, basically saying, both giving us more information about what happened to those places, which ones still existed, which ones didn't. And out of that conversation, we began to understand the forces of gentrification in Porto, and how difficult it is to remain in association. One thing that's very different about Porto than Lisbon is that Lisbon had, as Susan showed, a particular kind of a neighborhood where the African descent, the African immigrants and Afro-Portuguese people lived. That was not the case in Porto. They were, really everything was dispersed, which we learned very quickly. And yet, so it was essential then to begin to meet individuals. So Donna Claudia was one of them, Dori Negro another, and we started to realize, like, when you look at maps, you can pinpoint things that are happening in the city, but those things also might exist in your memory since they no longer happen, or they may exist still today. So Dori did a really, responded to our request to map the city from his own perspective. And he made this very beautiful video performance called Porto Negro. And he began to talk, through this performance, interrogate what it means for him as a Brazilian to be living on the street that is named after the person who conquered and murdered in his own homeland. So it began there. He began to take us around to show us other sort of groups that were fighting racism. And so we learned a lot about both the Black Lives Matter movement through Dory, and also he was very involved in the LGBT community. And then he began, we out of that kind of mapping, we thought, all right, what would it mean to take walks in the city? I'm somebody who's really interested in walking arts and walking art practices. And so even though we couldn't be present, we were absent physically, we could become present through shooting, having Bia be on the ground, shooting through her iPhone the walks while we were on Zoom. So we literally accompanied people like Dory, taking us through the city and showing us places and telling us stories of what he experienced in his life. So we have a lot, we went and began to meet a lot of different people who took us on these walks. And they started to introduce us to the things that were part of their daily lives, like Ishmael here taking us to his barber. There's a whole kind of subculture of black barbers in the city. Dona Claudia taking us to a place called Rio Bom, where many of the people, especially from Cape Verde, lived just on the edge of the city, of the river. Many people who live in Porto don't even know this. And also to various housing projects where she, had her friends show us their lives and show us the ways in which they had created communities in those areas. So this is a map, which was actually included in the exhibition, that shows literally how you create a community through an art project. Sometimes these are temporary communities that allow us to create bonds between people, many of whom didn't even know each other to begin with. So you can see how many people we talked to and involved in the project, but also how those connections came about. So by then it was April, and we realized we had an exhibition that we were supposed to stage in May. And we were constantly trying to keep each other calm about the fact that we had a million experiences that were amazing, but what do we put in a white box? And so we decided that one of the ways we could collect these experiences and make them more palpable and physical for viewers was to do annotated photographs and to host a workshop where we were on Zoom again. Others could come in on Zoom or could come to the space. And what we did was print many of the still photos from the walks. We also invited people to bring in their own photos that we printed. And then they could annotate their stories on site or take these home with them and write their stories. So we ended up with many of these. And the stories were extraordinary, as we had learned on the walks. Many of them were about the ways in which they encountered racism in the streets of Porto. Others had talked a lot about the way in which they found resilience. I mean, we had entrepreneurs, we had barbers, we had gym folks. We had so many different kinds of people, and they each had very, very distinct experiences. So ultimately, we also had videos. Let me show you just quickly a little snippet from one of these. So during this time, we had to start to edit these so that they could be short little snippets that would also go into the exhibition.
Eugênia. Isso. Para a coragem. Sim. É muito lugar, garoto. Até já está, querido. Ah, quando está com muito calor, não é? Tá bem. Ela pode já botar tijão sapatinha, tijão de pedra, milho.
Okay, just oops, to clarify, when we started to create the videos, some of them had been shot by another person we brought to the team, Cynthia Bodenhurst, who really knows a lot about technological issues. And because it was COVID, for example, we couldn't have headphones in the space. So we needed to figure out how to use QR codes. And Cynthia had the brilliant idea of why not have the QR codes relate to the cultures of the Afro-descendant peoples. So she went and worked with variations on the Angolan Sona drawings, and those were inserted onto the walls. You can see a few of them here, along with the photographs, as well as objects that people had loaned us that kind of related to the stories in the photos, so that you could enter. It was a very layered experience. And you can see that when we put the show together, it was on the backdrop of a city, the city of Porto's diagrammatic sketch. So it really was about this idea of remapping Porto from a Black perspective. And as I said, we had the map on the wall. And so when people came to the opening, they could find themselves, but they could also begin to meet one another. And we had artifacts, various kinds of things. And we also then began to use the gallery as a site for gatherings where people literally could not only meet one another at an opening, but actually have focused conversations on their experiences, on one of the things that's very important to realize is that this gallery was actually at the University of Porto in the rectory. So it was also an implication about or a kind of intervention, if you will, in the discourses of the university, which were really limited around issues of racism and decolonization. In fact, Dory was one of the only, there were a very, very few Black students who were studying there. So all of these stories emerged. We got a lot of great press coverage, and that brought more people in. And others also began to do walkthroughs for university groups, etc. So I say these things mainly to show you that there is that moment where you have to begin to think about how do you work with the community, but then how do you use, if you're planning on showing the work in a gallery space, how do you begin to imagine the gallery space as a site that really enables people to access that work? So I think I'm probably at time and I should pass the baton, but I will do that with Luli, and hopefully later we can come back and look more fully at some of the questions that arise out of the projects.
Thanks, Lyd. It was great.
Thank you, Lydia. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Maria, for hosting, and thanks everybody for being here. I think I can speak for the three of us when I say that we are very excited about hearing the stories and the projects that people are cooking for the workshop. I come from a different background. I'm not a photographer per se. I'm a visual artist and I work in different mediums. And I am also Susan's studio manager. And I was a few years ago a student at the grad program at Parsons, that Lydia was one of the people running the program. So that's how we all met. And as a studio manager at Susan's studio, I, have different capacities, and a lot of them are creative, and I join her in her collaborative and community and socially engaged projects a lot of the time, sometimes in book formats, and mostly with the project that she already mentioned, the Kurdistan workshop that happens in every occasion of mediations, or almost in every occasion of the mediation show, where, with her, we accompany and guide the participants with the process of telling their own story, and mostly, not only in a written format, but also mostly visually in my case. So I'm hoping that my role here is also to guide the participants in their own creative process, in decision making, when it comes to building a visual narrative, and bringing my critical eye and experience, and hopefully being useful for everybody in that process as well. Like I said, I'm going to try to be as brief as I can presenting my practice. It's it's going to be a little bit of a pause on this like exclusively community oriented practice that Susan and Lydia have. I'm going to share now. So like I said, I'm not a photographer. I am mostly a collage artist. And let me change one thing here. I work with images. I work with appropriated images that other people make. I'm interested in the craft of collage because I think it enables unpredictable connections between representations of any kind of nature and context. And you build a whole from the parts, and there's always something surprising and interesting happening when you do that. In my case, the imagery that I use is like cultural reference from different time periods. And I will show some of my work from the last few years. This is an example of one of the collages. And one thing that is constant in most of this work that I'm going to show is work on paper, and it's very intimate in terms of size as well. And one thing that is constant is the use of images of statues and monuments. The way I became interested in this is around the time when I moved to New York. It was around the time where decolonizing activism was coming on very strong, and there was a lot of toppling of monuments and supremacist monuments, slave owners, dictators, you name it, colonizers that were being overthrown. And it was a very frequent action. It was getting very strong, and it was very exciting. It was a very exciting time. And that is when, it made me like stop and look at these objects that were like usually overlooked, and be like, question why they exist, who decide to, who deserves a monument, who's important enough, and how do we understand our history and our reality based on that. So I started observing and decided as a collage artist to take action on a simple gesture of using images of these statues, and dissect them, and kind of like in the process of liberating certain aspects of their meaning by cutting out and play around with their roles and their gestures, and making them vulnerable, and making them silly, gay, poor, and different, so on and so on. This was the first interaction with this idea of monuments. I was never interested in replicating monuments, making the sculptures or anything like that. It was more of the gesture of observing how history was told to us and messing around with it. And this evolved slowly into a consistent collage practice for a decade or so now, where I work on ongoing series that combine the idea of the public and the private, the artificial and the real, the static and the alive, and the dictated narrative versus free interpretation, which manifests in endless possibilities of new meaning through this craft of collage. These are some examples of one of the series where I used catalog of bridal gowns with images of statues. In this one, I use images from covers of pulp novels with the statues, and naturally the idea of deconstructing the fixed and recorded history, especially the one dictated by the male gaze, became more obvious to me as I kept working on this manner. And another thing that naturally happened was that my female queer eye found this gesture of bringing together, which is the nature of collage, as an act of resistance to the dominant history and the hegemonic visions imposed on me. So these are more examples of another series, which is when, of course, a more personal interest came across in movies and popular culture. The idea of the this idealized representation of women that I kept observing in different instances of history. In this case, a more recent idea of what beauty is through Hollywood celebrities, but also if you think about neoclassical Greek statues, and also how a lot of it is about representing this ideal body. So how not that different through religion, in this case, movies and religion is not that different to me in my head when it comes to like how we consume ideas, how they are told to us, and what popular culture is in general. So these are more examples, in this case from ads, from vintage Life magazines. And then, this is just a small selection of some of the series that I've been working on. And then at times the collage also takes a more 3D approach. In this case, large installation of small objects, where I also bring the idea of the domestic into the narrative with the knickknacks and objects that I compulsively collect and buy and find in the city. And they, these are objects of small size that I keep them that way to give a more of like an intimate and relatable, to be more relatable to the viewer. And this is, another way of making collage and mixing medias or narratives or images or forms, adding material to build a new meaning from an inherited meaning that already exists in an object. And this is with small gestures, you can say a lot. These are more examples of this installation. And then lastly, playing around with scale. This is an example, like the opposite example of the installation that I just show. In this case, I keep working with the cutouts from books. So the material that I work with is very small, like intimate size. But I also, through a digital process, I started blowing them up and created this human scale sculptures that are flat, and they take on space and they become more sculptural and also relatable because they're like human size, and in this case mixed with objects and sculptures that I made. For this particular case, I'm not going to go into the details, but it's based on a Greek myth that is about female like sorority. So this is an example of one of the installations of this piece, and then this is another one. So I could go on and show a lot more work, but I think this is just to give an example of how maybe I think visually, or what my language is, and what I'm interested in. And yeah, so
Well, thanks,
that
Lydia.
was it.
Because I think probably everybody on the call gets a sense how we complement, or in different ways we hope to complement, to support any of you in the ideas that you have. That's really the goal of the class, is to, you have to begin with the ideas and the connections. I think, there are lots of things that we've said. Hopefully you've underlined some of them in your mind or on notes. I mean, I love when Lydia reminded us all about the invitation, the process of invitation and feeling relevant to a community. And so we're going to have a process where, as you develop your ideas, we will review those ideas. Obviously, we can't do a workshop, unfortunately, for all 25. That's a Maria can tell us a little bit about the process of how we go from today. This was really to try and inspire you as to who you're going to be working with amongst us. And of course, we expect to evolve in surprising ways ourselves with you. So there's nothing fixed in this process. This is all about just, we're coming from a set of experiences to inspire you to consider what you might be able to engage with, and the communities, the ideas, and we're there for you, to support you.
Thank you so much, Susan, Lydia, and Lou. I'm absolutely positive about that your perspectives are opening up really wide horizons, how to think about photography, how to use photography, how to offer it to as a language. And what I really appreciate about Lydia saying as well, we are not doing this for communities, we are doing it with communities. And even though we have titled this masterclass, Photography Empowers, yes, let's give that power to photography, that it can empower people, communities. But I would not like us to feel that we are capable of empower anybody. I think our task here is to give people the opportunity to find the strength to use it for themselves and to empower themselves. So to give them the voice, to give them the tools, to give them the process, which you might be the ones who can create for people you want to work with, not for. And this is, I think, is the strongest point of photography nowadays, that it can offer the tool and the language and the communication of realities, which we might not just obviously see. And yes, there are, of course, some important dates in this open call. You all know probably that next Friday, which is 14th of April, we are expecting your applications. As we said, it is working on a project which is done by photographers, but with communities. So as you will see, or you probably did already in the open call, it's about you, it's about the description of the project, of the idea you have, and it's also at least kind of basic agreement from the community that you want to work with. I would rather not go through the whole open call now, because I think you all know it, you can see it, you can read it very carefully. I think we were quite thoroughly explaining what we would like to find with you. As said, 12 up to 12 participants will be selected. Well, I would say up to 12 projects will be selecting, because our ladies don't know you, so it's gonna really be the projects who will speak to them selecting you. And at this point, perhaps I would rather give the word to you, to us, to maybe pack your ideas, to maybe clarify if there is something what you would like to know. and we are happy to answer.
And it
Yeah.
could be to any of us individually, or it could be just an open question that any of us could respond to.
Yeah. Or maybe opinion or your view, how you see it, how is this just expanding your way of thinking right now? Did you expect something else and now you are starting to think differently about photography? Because what we've seen, photography really can go very broad here and it can be used in very different ways.
Maria, can I ask something?
Absolutely, Fernanda.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's amazing. Susan, I would like to understand a bit how do you see community? What's the definition of community for this project? Can be a community made for, I don't know, 5 people, if it's a very tiny community somewhere in a very isolated location, for instance.
It's a great question. I'm really glad you asked it. And I think Lydia might respond too to this. I mean, I don't have a definition of community. I think it can evolve. It should be something that you feel, I guess, the connection. The question is what connects you to the community and where do you see the potential of that community growing through your relationship to and with them? I wouldn't define it with any size or any space or any place or, obviously you could dispute whether we could start theoretically disputing whether if you're Kurdish, are you part of a community? Because they're also Turkish and Iraqi and, multiple ethnic backgrounds. Therefore, what makes them feel that they are community and what a group might feel themselves to be is as important as how they might be defined by others, I would say. Lydia, do you want to add to that? You've worked with so many different kinds of communities.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm
helpful.
sorry. I wanted to, there are many other projects that I'd love to share with you, but you can find on the website. But I think this question is a really important one. And in many ways, the answer is there is no singular answer. And the person who, I'm going to just put it in the chat. There's a book that was really helpful to me in thinking through that. It was by an art historian named Mi-Wan Kwan, and she talked about, really nuanced this idea of community, because sometimes there's almost like a mythical notion of community, like the community of women, but we all know, for example, that there's no singular meaning of how that's understood or lived or, things like that. There's also, geographic communities. So I don't know if, your group of 5 happen to live in the same building. It might be. There are also communities that are brought together through particular interests or practices, like a religious community, for example, that don't necessarily live near each other, but they are bound to each other through their belief systems. But there's also the kind of community that I alluded to also happening in the Travessia project in Porto, which was that, a community can be formed through the making of an artwork. So if you are prompting a question to people, they might then come together because they find that question interesting. And hopefully you find the question interesting too. I think that's what Susan was getting at. You've got to have some skin in the game, as they say, or, some kind of a genuine interest in what you're wanting to learn through the making of the project. And so if that's the case, then, it may be that all these people come together and meet, and it might be an ephemeral experience for them. It might last a month or a year or a day. I don't know, but it is, that's another way of thinking about a community. Not that any one of those is better than any other, but I think your strategies for how to work with different sorts of communities then also need to be nuanced. I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
It's clear now.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Fernanda, and for answers, Susan and Lydia. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, can you hear me? Because I have a bad internet. So
We
okay.
can hear you, Dagmar, yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. So my question is, I have two communities in mind, and with both I am pretty close. Now, I think one community is a bit more, in a sense, like they're both socially relevant, I believe, but like one I think is more, and there should be like more conversation about one community specifically, especially in Slovenia. However, I do feel from their side a bit more like hesitation in a way. So now I'm kind of dabbling. I know they would say yes, like they would be like, yes, fine. But I do feel like there's a bit of hesitancy there. So then I was thinking, especially Lydia, when you said about the invitation, I know that the second community would be way more open, in a sense, also like happy to work with me. So I guess I'm a little bit, yeah, like how to decide in this like context.
Sounds like you're sort of answering your own question. I mean, I don't think you want to start in some resistance. I mean, it depends what hesitation or resistance. There's a spectrum there. Hesitation could be just a question of trust. I mean, we didn't even bring that word into this, but of course the trust is slow. And one of, I think, the challenges, particularly for this masterclass, is we're talking about a relatively short timeline. I mean, once you're selected, it's kind of a 2-month, 6 to 8 week period. And it depends how much time you have, how well you know people, you know, how much trust is already there to build on versus you're building and expanding and extending. So I think that's an important consideration. You want comfort in this experimental project, you know, that you're working together with people who want to be with you. And, you know, that's, I think this for versus with is a very important idea to keep focused on. And I love that you know, Lydia just emphasized, what are you learning? It's not like what you're bringing to them to do for them, etc. So we're flipping around some of the models that photographers have, for the most part, worked with, you know, and I think you have to process that a little bit and then think, which community will you learn the most from working with?
And also I want to add, like, this idea of trust, it might have to do something with lack of clarity, maybe, like just as an idea. It might be that they need more clarification on what it is for them, what it involves, what does it mean for their community. So if that is not super laid out and clear, maybe that could be a reason why they're hesitating.
Yeah.
yeah. I'll add, I think both of those points are really important, is that, you know, as with any project, this is not the be all end all of your life kind of thing. So, you know, you've learned from each project and you take what you learn to the next project. So I would pick something that you think is going to be really feasible in the time frame that we have. I mean, I've done more than 12 projects in, you know, post-Soviet Georgia. And I had no intention of doing that when I first started working there, but it's just that the trust that was built and one experience led to another and led to another. And then also, you know, part of what this involves sometimes is people look at what you've done in the past and then they think, oh, well, that looks interesting. I would love to see what we could do together. So, you know, it is all of these kind of mixes of practicality, of clarity, and of, you know, your own conviction about what feels the most urgent to you.
Yeah, that's great to say. And I mean, if we had a little more time and maybe at some point, Lydia and I, you know, you always should read what you said you were going to do in relationship to what you ended up doing. But I can guarantee you in many, many cases, it's the openness to the exploration that you have to build into this. So you don't want to tell them what you're doing, because then you're not collaborating in a process of developing a concept together, you know? And we had no idea of all the, I think Lydia went through it in detail, which was helpful to see how many stages we were kind of evolving in our own ideas about how we were going to bring something to a space. The only obligation we had was to do that. Actually, there was no guidance. There were very minimal resources. We didn't emphasize that. That's probably something that you don't want to ask now, but you're all concerned about at some level too. And that can be a direct question back to Maria. But, you know, I don't think I certainly think in every case, what evolved was an expression of the kind of connectivity that we evolved, you know, we felt, and the concept evolved in that way too. So I really want to keep it, I worry a little bit if you feel that the community needs to know what you're going to do. I think what you have to open up is a process of together we're going to evolve that. And you're going to be as open to their ideas as they will hopefully be to yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dagmar, for your question. Perhaps one point which is also still important here is how to implement your project. So after you are selected, that means you will again meet Susan, Lydia, and Lou on the 25th of April, and then discuss your project, which will be already developing. And then when you meet in live, which is the third weekend in June, just before Susan's opening, that is 17 and 18 June, then you're gonna work live. And then it's the phase already when your projects come to life. Now, as we could not actually come up with the idea what should happen with those projects, like that we want to bring them together in a gallery space and show them. Well, it was also an idea, but we didn't want to propose that. We rather propose you to have ideas how you want to give those projects maybe back to communities, or how you want to develop the final results with them. Of course, here we're gonna talk also about how to make that possible. I'm telling you now that we are not gonna print beautiful frames or whatever photos. That's not the purpose here. But we will bring them to life in a way that they will be seen also in general public, of course, but the way that you want to present them within communities and have your purpose of the project realized. So this is basically what it is. Of course, there are some details we will have to discuss later on. But now I think it's really the moment for you to take this inspiration which you hopefully gathered today, and really prepare your applications. And later on, of course, I think our three mentors will be happy to also develop those ideas with you. If they are good, they will be even happier, I'm sure. They must be good. I think that's the purpose of this, and we believe in you that you have good ideas, because there are also really interesting stories you're already developing, you might be working on already, and this might be a new step for you to show them and to bring them to a new level.
Yeah. Maria, I would just add one thing, that when we were discussing this, it was very hard to know, without knowing what ideas you're going to bring forward, how that live lab will play out too in those 2 days. So I think, and also the intermediary time between April 25th and the time we meet, there may be informal, but you have to assume that you're really working. We're there with to be able to respond in a modest way, but it's really on you to work through the issues that you're facing. And then, of course, if there are concerns between Maria and Julia and our responses, I think it's possible that some of you will have a project that you actually could install on that weekend, but it's not the obligation. It's not necessarily the goal. And I think that's a great way to be, and we can respond as appropriately to whatever you are imagining. So I just
Exactly.
want to keep that open as a possibility that there could be installations related to for that weekend.
And also, we did say in the open call, it is about Slovenian communities. But if you are coming from the region, don't limit yourself to Slovenian communities. If you have communities which you want to work with, I'm sure there are ways how you can bring your project back to the communities and how we can connect that project you're going to create through internet, through our network, and bring it into the framework and network of our gallery and this project, but still have the purpose at the spot where you work. Nina, I've seen you to ask something.
Yes, thank you for today. It was really nice. And Susan, I saw your exhibition in America House in Berlin. It was really great.
Oh,
last
great.
year. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. I was so happy about this email. Yeah, I just wanted to ask, because I'm studying currently in Rotterdam, if it's possible that I work with somebody here or even from some other continent, like through online, and if it's possible to use their photos also. Like if they take the
Are you
photos
saying
of
that you're
their-
going to, but you're saying that you're going to be in Rotterdam up until the time of the live lab in June?
I don't know, I'm traveling back and forth, but yeah, I'm coming.
Because it's really about work
Yeah.
time. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
main thing is it's a very short timeline, you know, it's a 5-6 week timeline. So it's about how you can do whatever the proposal will be is going to be the most important question. Obviously, if you're moving between two communities, you know, which one are you going to be able, you know, two geographical spaces. I mean, I don't know how much that's going to inhibit your having continuity with the work you're imagining doing. I don't know, Lydia, what's your feeling about that? I think it could be in either place. It's really about your time in that
Yeah.
5 or 6 weeks.
I think it would be, you know, it's a little hard to know right now, Nina, without reading about what you're proposing and what the community is, you know. So it's I don't know, I don't really know how to answer that, because I think you know, there's the kind of work, as I just demonstrated with Travestia, you can do a lot at a distance, but you still are having to work with those people, you know, but somehow, you know, and to keep the continuity going.
Yeah, because there are some people from Palestine here that I met, and yeah, maybe to contact with the people from, they live there also in like.
I think it's about the idea again, Nina. I think you're probably early on beginning to sort out some ideas.
Okay.
It's if the idea, if you feel propelled and passionate about doing something, you'll find a solution, as we did out of necessity. It wasn't our choice. It wasn't what we proposed. We faced the problem of COVID that constrained us, and therefore that became the modality. You know, you can imagine just you will face certain challenges. You should address how you're going to respond to those, because those will be the questions we have for you, and you should be having
Right.
beforehand.
Okay. And can we apply with more projects and then you pick one or
You
just
should be
one?
committed to one project, you know, that you
Okay.
really want to do. You know, again, we're all in this together. We're trying to do this as respectfully to all, as many as we can include, and with as much diversity of possibilities, I think. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say you can't come in with 2 projects, but you should have a priority of what you really want to do. Not, is this idea better than that idea, and put that in our lap,
Yeah.
from my view. But I don't know. Lydia, Lou, do you feel?
I think if you think, Nina, that you feel very strongly about a project and you can figure out a way to, and you're confident about the ways in which you will go with it and through it, I think that should be enough. You know, if you are there, you're not there, if it's remotely, if not, I mean, Lydia and Susan's example at Porto is like an example of that. Like they had to figure out how to do it and they figured it out. So if you think that, I would follow your, like Susan said, it's about your idea, but follow your guts as well. And if you feel very strongly about and very connected to this particular project, doesn't really matter where, how, as long as you can do it and you have a plan to do it. And that is clear in the proposal for the instance that we have to read it and understand it.
Okay,
Thank
you. Thank you.
I think the question she's asking is really about an either or. Can you propose two projects? And Lydia, I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, if you really feel equally about two possibilities, you're asking us to choose you on the basis of either or both. It's kind of a odd way to frame it. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
How do you feel about that, Lydia?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally it's better if you put everything, all your energy into one project proposal. You know, as I can't remember if it was Susan or Luli that said it, but you know, we also then have the challenge of kind of curating the group that goes forward. And if everybody is working with the same community, you know, that's going to be it. Then we might choose somebody else, you know, so it's hard to know until we see what comes in. But I think as much as it's tempting to put more than one proposal in, probably better to really think through all the challenges and imagine it as fully as you can.
Thank you, Nina. We wish you good luck with decisions. And I see Method's hand.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this short presentation. I'd have a couple of questions. I'm still not sure whether I'll be fully able to take part because I'm still waiting for one confirmation to do a project right that weekend in June. Anyway, but that is to come later. I have a couple of points. I've done, I would say, a fair amount of work with communities, and I know it takes a long time and it's usually organic and you can't really predict how long projects are going to take. So that may be 2 weeks or it may be 6 months, you know, whatever happens. To what extent do you see these projects being done in a sense that are presentable? The second point is, in terms of presentation, I didn't quite read what we are planning to do with these projects once we're doing the lab in June, if I'm taking part, or in fact, if I'm selected, whatever. Are they being presented in the gallery? Are they being presented somewhere else? What are we doing? What's the idea?
Yes, so the idea is that we kind of left this answer to you. So it's part of your project to have the idea what you want to do with the presentation of the project. Of course, we are here to help you with that. We do have some possibilities if you have some ideas what would be an interesting place to present it, or we do also have some ideas with the alternative space where projects could find a space. But the point is, how do you want to connect this project with the community you work with? So how can you bring it back to community, or what the community can have from that?
Okay,
so
I mean,
yes.
sorry, just to maybe reiterate the question. The lab is not having a corner in the show of Susan's, no?
No, that's not the point.
Okay,
no.
okay.
No,
this is how I might
what's-
have understood it through the conversation, but I was obviously
Okay,
wrong.
Method, I'm sorry. Maybe to complement what Maria is saying, I think until we see projects and select the cohort who's going to work together, we can't make a decision as to whether or not suddenly we would think, oh, these 3 projects would be amazing to bring together, because they're three different projects within working with the same community somewhere, let's say in Ljubljana, well, let's just say. So maybe we would bring those projects together and encourage you all to work together. Or you're working separately. I mean, there's so much will depend on what ideas you all have. There is no assumption that the end of the live lab, you have the way, let's say, a working photographer would do a project and present the slideshow at the end of the lab, right? This is
Okay.
about process, and the answer to your first question is, it may be just the first stage of a process that you all want to continue. Ideally, there might even be funding to continue. We don't know. Maybe there are partnerships that can evolve from this if we find a way to showcase. I think showcasing itself is going to depend completely on all of you, how far you go and what we feel we can share. Maybe we'll have another open Zoom and you'll each talk about your project, and that will inspire other people to participate in some way, not in making their own projects, but in supporting the ones that you're developing. I think it's too early for us to know, but there is no assumption that anything has to be presented at the
Okay.
end of the workshop. It's
Mhm.
all process-based.
Yeah.
And
I think I
this is
speak for
why
you too, Lydia. Is anything you want to add to that? Yeah,
No, I think you really covered it.
okay.
And I think this is why it's also kind of a new community growing up here, because I'm sure you're going to also connect to each other, help each other, go through the process together. So it is as well kind of a community we work with, being connected through this masterclass for sure. And if there are no burning questions, any more left, I think
Excuse me? Hi.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I have just one very short question. If we are not working on this project yet, what do you expect us, or what do you suggest us to send photos of?
Well, as we said, reference of some of your work you've done before, which might somehow reflect your way of picturing, the story you want to picture now. So it must be a reference to give us a hint what kind of language, what kind of style you want to take, how you want to tell your visual story.
Yeah, to help us understand that you can achieve what it is that you're setting forth. You want to give us a sense of what your experience is, or what your, how, I think it's not just the style of your photograph that you're going to impose on a community. It's sort of how you've approached another project in your past that helps us understand your motivation.
And also including, if you're in a research phase, maybe some elements of that to explain the project that you're going to work on. If you don't have images of, that could be helpful too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Well, we look forward to reading all of you and probably seeing some of you, though maybe some of you will have another return, presentation at the end of a process that's undetermined yet. But thank you all for participating at this level and being interested, and we look forward to seeing everyone somehow in the next month or so, 2 months.
Yes, let's
Okay.
hope so. And thank you so much,
Thanks,
Susan,
Maria and Julia.
Lydia, and
Great to see everyone.
Luciana. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
And we are here to answer your further questions or to help you if you need anything. Let us know. And don't forget, it's 14th of April. Okay.
No exception.
Thank you.
No
Bye.
exception. Bye-bye.
Bye.